Good morning, everyone. Good to see you here. Welcome to the live in-person and live Zoom worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside. Thank you for joining us here. Hello? Yes. Okay, did you hear the first part? Should I start again? Okay, good morning. Welcome to the live in-person and live Zoom worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Riverside. Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you for joining us remotely by Zoom, where we will continue live streaming and posting these services on our YouTube channel for our virtual attendees. I'm Grace Preuss, a member of the worship committee, and I will be one of your worship associates today. Other members of the worship committee you will hear from include Dinah Rowe, our church treasurer. We welcome you to join us this morning with an open mind and an open heart, and with muted electronic devices, please. We invite you to leave your worries and defenses at the door and trust that what happens in worship is inspiring and powerful. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make each of us braver, more compassionate, and wiser as we begin a new day and a new week. Although our doors are open, the pandemic is not over. So while we are here, please keep your masks on and socially distance. We can speak in normal tones, but singing or chanting creates an increased risk of airborne exposure. So we ask you to refrain for the time being. We invite those of you in the sanctuary to sit back and enjoy listening to the songs. For those of you at home, sing your hearts out. And now I invite you to sit back and take a slow, deep breath as we move into the worship hour. For our call to worship, you are welcome to read with me the mission statement of our church. Our mission is to foster a diverse religious community that celebrates life, affirms the individual, encourages spiritual growth and open thought, and works to advance social justice and environmental sustainability. Traditionally observed on the first Monday in September, Labor Day is an annual celebration of the social and economic achievements of American workers. The holiday is rooted in the late 19th century when labor activists pushed for a federal holiday to recognize the many contributions workers have made to America's strength, prosperity, and well-being. In 1909, the Sunday preceding Labor Day was adopted as Labor Sunday and dedicated to the spiritual and educational aspects of the labor movement. Welcome to Labor Sunday, which brings us to today's service. Our speaker today is Jerry Mead-Lucero. Jerry has been the host and producer of Labor Express Radio since 2004. Labor Express is Chicago's only labor news and current affairs radio program, news for the working people by the working people. He continues to produce the program despite now living in California for most of the year. Jerry has been a labor activist, educator, immigrants' rights activist, and environmental justice organizer for over 33 years. He has been a member of several unions at various times, including the Industrial Workers of the World, the National Writers Union, and the American Federation of Teachers. He occasionally writes for national labor publications like Labor Notes. Currently, Jerry is active with the Inland Empire branch of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, and served as a co-chair of its labor working group for the past year. Jerry says, I hear it all the time. Statements like, I guess unions were once good and helped people out, but they're unnecessary today. Or, unions just protect workers who don't want to work. Or, those union bosses just want your dues money. That's all they care about. I'm sure you can come up with at least a dozen more statements like this. I am going to talk about why workers utilizing their collective power has and can accomplish great things. We will discuss how unions shaped our history for the better and why a strengthened labor movement is essential to face the challenges of the present in the future. I hope we will all be able to agree after the talk that unions at their best are one of the greatest tools working people have to build a society rooted in social justice. We have two lightings of sacred flames. The first is the occupied Indigenous Peoples Remembrance Candle. The second is the lighting of our own chalice, the symbol of our faith. We walk upon the traditional territories of diverse and sovereign peoples, the original people of this land who continue to cry out for justice and self-determination. This spot we occupy was first the sacred space of several groups of California Indians, including the Cahuilla, the Cupeño, and the Serrano. We, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Riverside, light this sacred flame as the stewards of this sacred and holy place. We are blessed with a space and opportunity to strive to live out our common principles, to bring justice, equity, and compassion into our daily lives, to resist all that threatens the earth and her people, and to be part of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Let these thoughts carry us forth as we journey and worship together. Today's reading of the chalice lighting is Inherent Worth and Dignity by Steve Stock. We light this chalice to celebrate the inherent worth and dignity of every person, to reaffirm the historic pledge of liberal faith to seek that justice which transcends mere legality and moves toward the resolution of true equality, and to share that love which is ultimately beyond even our cherished reason, that love which unites us. Thank you, Bill. Our opening hymn this morning is I Wish I Knew How. For those in the sanctuary, please sit back and enjoy the hymn.
I
We have a tradition here at UUCR to welcome those who are visitors or perhaps returning after some time away. We know it can be uncomfortable to stand up and speak in front of others, and so I will now ask for a volunteer from someone who has been here a while to tell us your name and how you found out about the church. We ask you to hold the mic close to your face and speak into it directly and clearly so everyone can hear. So we have a volunteer, Pat. Hi, Pat.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it on? Good. Okay. I'm Pat Kowunder, and I first came to this church to do Tai Chi in 1984. And because I was so church phobic for 5 years, I never looked in here. But when I loved it, and then I came and joined the church, and it's been wonderful ever since. It's the people that make this church great.
Thank you, Pat. And that's how it's done. If you are new here, a visitor, or an old friend, please raise your hand to stand and Bill will come around with a freshly sanitized mic for each person. Please let us know who you are, where you are from, and how you found out about us.
If you forgive me, I'm going to sit because it's hard for me to get up and down. My name is Lauren, and I'm an unusual Unitarian in that I was raised Unitarian. And I had an uncle who was a Unitarian minister. So when I first came to California, I didn't think there was a Unitarian church in the area. And then for some reason, I heard about it being used for weddings. So then I thought it was only a wedding venue. And then when I found out it was a real church, I came. Since then, I just lost my sound. Oh, there it is. And so that's my story, I guess. I don't know what else to say, right?
Welcome, Lauren.
Hello, my name's Brad. First time here. I've just driven by the building a bunch of times and been wanting to come in. It's such a beautiful old building. I like the architecture and it's just amazing in here. Try to get she's a bartender and she had to work late last night. So hopefully next week I'll have a lady on my shoulder and we'll have one more person. And thanks for being here.
Thank you. Welcome. Is there anyone else here in the hall? Okay. If there's someone online who would like to introduce themselves, please raise your hand and we will call on you. So for our new guests, our visitors book is in the parish hall. Please leave your name before you leave so that we know you are here and your contact information if you would like to know about upcoming events. For those online, the best way to get added to the mailing list is to email the church office at admin@uuchurchofriverside.org. There are a few announcements we'd like to share. During the service, we will mention several websites, email addresses, and phone numbers. At the end of the service, we will leave up a slide with all of this information, and it is available on our website. The monthly UUCR newsletter comes out the first of every month by email and per request by postal mail. If you have something you feel is newsworthy or would like to contribute, please email uuchurchofriverside.calendar@gmail.com or call the church office at 951-686-6515. If you would like to be added to our mailing list, please contact the church office. The first Sunday luncheon will be held in the parish hall today after the service. Join us this month for a salad bar and some casual socializing. A table is set out in front of the kitchen where you will be asked to choose items off of a menu and then directed to another table where you can pick it up. Donations are welcome as you are willing and able. The Concerned UUs of Riverside, CUUR, is the community outreach arm of the of the Social Environmental Justice Committee, and we'll be meeting today in the Social Justice Room on the second floor of the annex at 12 noon. You can find the Zoom link and more information on the website under Justice. Our hymn now is Spirit of Life. If you are in the sanctuary, please sit back, close your eyes, and listen. Before we begin our joys and concerns, Pat Kawunder is going to come up to the pulpit. She has a few announcements for us as well.
Good morning. First of all, this coming Saturday is Women's Federation. We're meeting at 1 p.m. in Braemar Clubhouse. We invite everybody, of course, to come, all the women in the church, but we're asking people who are not vaccinated not to join us. Some of us won't survive if we get COVID, and so we're being really cautious. And I apologize for that. I would like anybody that can't come but wanted to let us know how you're doing to send me a text or an email, and we'll announce at the meeting, because we would like to keep up with everybody during this hard time. So that's this Saturday, 1 p.m. Clubhouse at Braemar. Secondly, the following Sunday, which I think is September 19th, is going to be a pool party and potluck in my backyard in Riverside. I live out near La Sierra. And it's at 4:30 in the afternoon, and we invite everybody. I have a little pool that Joey and Dax and Brianna have been enjoying this summer, and I would love to have everybody there. 4:30 potluck, we'll eat what everybody brings, you know, whatever we have. And at 6:30, a drum circle will be held. So it's both the pool party potluck and a drum circle, and people are invited to whatever part of it they want. I'm sorry? Next Sunday. It's Sunday the 19th. Yeah, it's a week after, it's 2 weeks. Yeah. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Joys and concerns. It is said that shared joy is a double joy. Shared sorrow is half sorrow. On the first Sunday of each month, we share the joys and concerns that we have received from you and which you have collected throughout the month. First, I'm going to read the joys and concerns which were given to us. So we have a book up here at the pulpit where people write down their joys and concerns throughout the month. So there's someone here who signed, "I've been alive for 27 years, I hate it here." So yes, people are struggling right now. There's another one that says, "I want to express gratitude to the team here at UUCR for their great work in the smooth production for my husband Ted's celebration of life." This is Pat. "Thanks to Robert, Kate, Adam, Bill Rowe, and bless all of you who helped." Thank you. Now we'd like to turn to the audience. If anyone has any joys or concerns that they would like to speak about.
I would say a felt deal, but with abortion case, and that it just proves that they are still a government to keep one eye out for. They have been on the wrong side of some social issues, and I hope they find a better way to express themselves, to carry themselves, and to strive for public. We also have people fighting floods across this world that are in dire way. Perhaps getting together with a few churches, wrapping a couple of pallets and shipping them to where to do the most good might be something we could look into.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to a joy or concern?
Good morning. I have a concern that I'd like to share. Over the last month, I've seen a lot of talk from people in Riverside about the increase in coyote activity. In particular, a lot of people's beloved pets have been eaten by coyotes, and a lot of talk about that this is a result of the overhousing development, which is pushing those coyotes into human territory and starting to eat our pets instead of the other wild animals. And so I just grieve for the interconnected web of life, which is currently being disrupted in so many ways.
Thank you. Spent a number of us, I'll get this right, Chad. It was wonderful to have them visit. We'd not met Nico before. Unfortunately, they kind of went back to floodwaters, but they are right. And anyway, that was the real joy for us.
Thank you, Kay. If there's no one else,
for
Okay.
that young man who the end of his rope. I know a lot of people who knife in the hand and were at least thinking about it. Years ago, that was me, once or twice. I hope that if you run into somebody who's not running ragged, that there's something you can say to them to hold on a little bit longer. Find joy, find a way out.
We place a stone in our water chalice to represent the joys and concerns we have shared with our church community and in recognition of those we hold close and have not shared. Thank you, Bill. May we remember those who have spoken, those who have named, and those who we hold in silence in our hearts. Now I'd like to invite Dinah Rowe to the pulpit.
Good morning. This portion of our service is to support our beloved historical church. This can be accomplished in several ways. In addition to our weekly collection, you may send your checks to the church office, which is shown. You may contribute by PayPal using the QR code, which is in the church website and also in the newsletter. Stater Brothers gives our church a rebate on Stater Brothers grocery cards, which we have in the church each Sunday. You get the full value, and the church also receives a percentage. And I also have $100 Amazon cards. Please donate as the Spirit moves you by whatever method works best. Thank you for your generosity. And to those who give of their time and their talent, thank you for your generous care and attention. Will our ushers please come forward to receive the collection?
Our next hymn is From You I Receive. Please sit back quietly and enjoy.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. From you I receive.
Our meditation today is by Kathleen McTeague. Those who lived before us, who struggled for justice and suffered injustice before us, have not melted into dust and have not disappeared. They are with us still. The lives they did hold us steady. We take them with us and with them choose the deeper path of living. Now let us pause for a moment of silence. Now, I would like to introduce Jerry Mead-Lucero, speaking to us on why unions matter and how to support them. Jerry?
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me today. Let me see if I can make sure we're ready to go here. Let's see. So let's see, I need to. There we go. Okay. And then I need to. Sorry about the delay here, getting the Zoom thing going. Okay, there we go. Anyway, thank you again for inviting me. I really appreciate you being here. It's been I was just talking to Grace earlier. It's been a while since I've been in a Unitarian congregation. I grew up Catholic myself, but I came kind of to a lot of my views, through the move to liberation theology. In college, I kind of, moved away from religious belief, but I used to work for a refugee resettlement agency in Chicago, where I'm from, that was based in the mainline Protestant churches. And so occasionally I would speak to one of the Unitarian congregations that was in the suburbs of Chicago. I have one joke, which I hope won't offend anybody here, but it sticks in my mind whenever I think about Unitarians and that I work with. One of the churches I used to work with was the UCC, the United Church of Christ, which is a fairly progressive denomination as well. And I had a very quirky pastor in one of the UCC churches. And I remember him telling me one time, he said, I used to be a Unitarian, but then I decided to believe in God. So no offense, I hope. Anyway, so unions, what are they good for? You already heard about me, so we can skip that. But I have some questions for you. Who here has been a union member or is a union member right now? Okay, cool. Which unions? Oh. Okay, good. Anybody else? Same. Okay, great. Well, okay. Who thinks unions are a relic of the past? You hear this all the time. If don't hesitate to raise your hand if this is true. I don't mind. I'm not offended. Anybody think that? Okay. Well, we hear it a lot, right? Say again. Good point. Very good point. Who thinks unions are corrupt? Okay, good. Who thinks unions just want your union dues for the union bosses? Okay. Well, there is, some truth to some of these things, but we'll go into that in a minute. Who has a difficult time has had a difficult time with a boss, current or former? All right, few of us. Okay. Who'd like to fire their boss? Okay. Who'd like to earn more money than they are now? All right. Who would like more time off? What about a 4-day work week? What happened to the fight for the shorter work day with the unions, right? A few of us like that idea. Okay. Who wishes their job was safer? particularly in the middle of the pandemic right now, right? This has become even more important. Who wants a more socially and economically just society? Okay, I figured probably everybody here, right? That's probably why you're here. All these things are possible, but they require our collective power, right? We're not going to build a more socially and economically just society as individuals, right? And even on the job, if we want more money, we want more respect, we want more time off. Yeah, occasionally, maybe if we go to the boss as an individual and he's a good guy and he likes us or whatever, right? But much more likely to win these things, it's going to require our collective power. And historically, that's what's been the case, right? Unions are definitely imperfect institutions. I'm glad a few people raised their hand and said they're corrupt, right? Or they look out only for union dues, right? I'm not going to stand up here and say that every union has been perfect and always done the right thing. My experience actually is a great deal of them haven't, right? And they've gone down the wrong path. But unions are at their best when they're democratic, bottom-up, rank-and-file led, right? When they're progressive minded, right? They realize that the broader social implications of society are also a part of what they're about, right? That they're militant, that they're willing to stand up to the boss. There's been too many unions that have kind of moved away from this, right? That they're social, this is most important, right? That they're based in social justice unionism, not business unionism, right? Business unionism is when unions basically are just focused on, let's get a little bit more money in the next contract, let's get a little bit more, maybe slightly more benefits, right? And that's their narrow focus, right? Unions that have a much bigger focus, right? That are about transforming the society for all working people, right? That's when unions are at their best. And that's why it's important that they have a class focus, right? Not just a member focus, right? They're looking out for the entire class of the working class, not just simply their members. Not that, they should be winning more for their members, but they need to look at the broader implications. If you look at the picture actually I put on the side, I'm gonna be a little biased here. As I said, I'm from Chicago originally. This is actually from the Chicago Teachers Union. And I think they've been real pioneers in this, right? If you look at what's on the banners, can people see that? What does it say on the banners there? The schools we need, what else? Smaller class sizes, right? Full-time counselors, nurses, librarians. So the Chicago Teachers Union has been terrific at not just being about wages and benefits, that's part of the struggle, right? But about expanding the services for their students, right? About making their schools what they call wraparound services, that they meet all the needs of the students, that they reach out to the wider community. That's why they've had tremendous community support, and they've won 2 really important strikes in the last 10 years, right? Because they've had this community support, because people in the neighborhood, parents, teachers, the students themselves recognize that those teachers want better schools. It's not just about winning more money for themselves, right? So let's look at what unions have accomplished in the past, right? So, before the 30s, really, unions in many ways were illegal in many cases, right? They were very weak. There was very little labor law that defended them. It's the 30s and the 40s was really the heyday of the rise of unions. And these unions called industrial unions. We have industrial unions and craft unions. Craft unions are like, people in the crafts, plumbers and electricians. Those are good unions to have, right? But they're very exclusive, right? Because they're based on a skill. Industrial unions were about bringing everybody in, right? Everybody in industry, no matter what skill you have, what it is. And they tended to be more open to across lines of race, across lines of sex, right? Because their strength was based on bringing everybody in. And they won important things like living wages, right? The 40-hour work week, the weekend, right? The famous phrase, the labor brought you the weekend, right? And they united the diverse working class. Remember, this is a time where a lot of immigrant groups were here and struggling, and African Americans who were largely left out of a lot of those craft unions, right, were finally brought into a lot of these industrial unions. So by the 50s and 60s, to a large degree, because of the work of unions, right, the working class had a fairly comfortable standard of living, right? Most working people in this country could afford a home, could afford, maybe a luxuries like a car and so on, right? You could support a whole family on one person's income in many cases, right? Now, what's wrong with this picture though? Thank you. I appreciate it. That was a big problem in the past with unions, right? That's something we need to be honest about, that when you go back to the 19th century and even the very early 20th century, unions tended to exclude African Americans. But again, those industrial unions, the CIO unions, Congress of Industrial Organizations in the 30s really turned that around. And actually even African Americans started to benefit, particularly by the 60s, postal workers, right? Pullman porters, which were, there's a lot of, interesting history there about they were meant to be servile, right? But they actually formed one of the first African-American unions. And the union movement was very much involved in the civil rights period, struggles of the 50s and 60s, right? This is a civil rights march. If you look closely, you'll see the UAW, right? United Auto Workers Union, which played a huge role in a lot of the civil rights struggles that we're familiar with, right? But then came the 70s and the 80s, right? The time of excess, I guess, for some people, right? But it was really at the beginning of a really one-sided class war against working people, right? The presidency of Ronald Reagan did a huge blow to working people. One of the very first things Reagan did when he came into office is break the PATCO union, the air traffic controllers union. This sent a signal to big business, right, that busting unions was okay, right? That the government was behind it and, we're not going to stop you from breaking unions. And that's exactly what happened. If you look at that chart at the bottom there, that goes from the early 80s to the mid 2000s, right? Or 2015, you see that this is the private sector particularly, but you see this gigantic drop off in unions, right? Public sector's been a little bit better, been able to maintain more unions, and that's the only reason we still have even the 10.8% we have today is because of public sector. The private sector is practically eliminated, but that's what happened throughout that period, right? This is the percent, again, this is price, this is the percentage of workers and unions. If you look back, it starts with the 1929, right before the 30s, right? Right before the Great Depression hits. You see that huge upsurge that happens to the point where in the 50s to the 60s, we have over 35% of the working classes and unions, right? But then it takes that dive, particularly in the 80s. So that now, like I said, we're at basically 10.8. Well, in the private sector, it's like 7%, I think, or so, but it's 10.8% when you consider public sector unions. Now look at this. This is a chart showing inequality in the United States, right? So look at that same period. You see really high inequality in the period before the Great Depression, right? And then all of a sudden, you see this change in the situation where the inequality really drops off in the 40s, in the 50s, and the 60s, right? And then it shoots up again starting in the 80s, right? Where we have inequality now that's just as high, if not higher, than it was before the Great Depression, right? So what if we put these two together, right? So there's a really close parallel between the percentage of workers in unions and the level of inequality, right? And it makes sense, right? Because unions allow workers to fight for a bigger portion of that societal product, right? One of the things, I don't have a chart here showing that particularly, but productivity and wages have totally diverged from each other, right? If you look back again to that period of the 50s and the 60s and the 40s, there was a bit of a close relationship between how productive workers were and how much wages they got. If you look at it now, they're hugely productive. Workers are making huge profits for corporations, right? But those wages haven't changed very much, right? And it all has to do with the power that working people have when they're organized collectively. So just a few examples of what, the difference that unions can make in people's lives, right? This just gives you an example of the difference in average wages. Notice, particularly for women, it's particularly important, right? Women benefit even more when they have access to being in a union. This also benefits, right? Workers are much more likely to have things like sick leave and health insurance when they're in unions. Now, hopefully, we're going to win health insurance for everybody, right? That should be the ultimate goal here. But as it stands right now, you're much better off, much more likely to have health insurance if you're in a union. And we talked about how women particularly benefit, right, from being in unions. This also extends to people of color. Now, we know the racial wealth gap in this country is a real problem, right? It's one of the fundamental things that we have to change about our society, right? Structural racism is real, no matter what the right wants to say about critical race theory being dangerous and all this stuff, right? We know that the racial wealth gap is one of our biggest challenges. Union membership hasn't eliminated the racial wealth gap completely, if you look at these figures here, right? But look at the difference between people in color when they have access to a union, when they're in a union, they're able to fight for better conditions and so on, than when they don't have access to one, right? So unions have been really important in that struggle to deal with the problem of racial inequality, right? So what about the future? All right, we've got a lot of things that we have to deal with in the future, right? The ecological crisis, that's probably first and foremost, right? If we can't get a hold of the ecological crisis, we're all in trouble, right? The automation, right? How much will jobs in the future, what will jobs in the future look like when so much of that is being done by robots and AI, right? What's going to happen to people without the skills that are needed for those kind of high-tech jobs and so on that are going to be coming from that? Globalization, people are already feeling the effects of this, right? In some ways, we should be happy about globalization. I was, very involved in the quote unquote anti-globalization movement. I hated that term, right? Because people on the left used to be internationalists, right? I still think I'm an internationalist. I believe in no borders. I believe in people working together across the world. But when we talk about globalization, we're talking about corporate globalization, right? We're talking about corporations being global and being able to move where they want, where wages are lowest. There's a famous quote, it was the head of GE, I think, years ago, who said, if I could have it my way, I'd have all our factories on ships and I just move them around the world wherever wages were cheapest at the time, right? I mean, that's what we're dealing with, right? And really one of the big challenges facing us is how do workers here develop those relationships with workers abroad, right? How do we not be in competition with workers in China, but be in relationship, in unity with workers in China, right? There's been more strikes in China than anywhere else in the world in the recent years. We never hear about it because of the information, is not let out very well, but we need to figure out how to make those alliances, right? So how can you help? Well, for one, if you're in a union, get active in your union. We talked about unions being corrupt. We talked about them being top down too often, right? We talked about them not being militant, not wanting to fight back. Well, it's your union, right? I actually went through a training at one point to be a union organizer, and I ended up not doing it at the time, but they kept telling me, the union is the members, the union is the members. Then I remember we did a little exercise in the training. I won't go into all the details. I don't want to take all that much time. But basically, at the end of the exercise, you're supposed to say, do you basically tell the workers that you've been organizing, forget it, you're not going to win, we're going to move on? Or do you try to, still win this strike that you're going to lose? And I remember I said, well, I realize that the union has to move on, that the resources are not there, that they're probably not going to win, but I'm going to tell the workers it's their union. You have to decide. And the people who were training me said, that's not the right answer. So you have to make the unions yours, right? If you're in a union, get active in a union, make it a democratic union. There's been reform movements in unions for years. The Teamsters for the Democratic Union, right? New directions in the UAW. We need to change these institutions too to make them more what they're supposed to be, right? If you're not in a union, join a union if you can, right? If it's an option in your workplace, or there's some way that you can get involved and join a union, I'd recommend that. Organize a union, right? Now, this is the hardest, right? And we don't have time to talk about the details about this, but I certainly am willing to reach out to people in the future if they want to know more about this. But, we need to organize unions more broadly in our society, no matter where you're working, what occupation you have, right? You have a right to be able to have a collective recognition, right? To be able to have a representative, right? So community solidarity is key, right? So even if you're not a union member, union successes rarely happen without community solidarity. So again, I point out sorry, my mouth is so dry. I point out the example of the teachers union in Chicago, right? Again, those strikes in Chicago would not have been won without community solidarity. Same thing would happen here in LA with the teachers union in LA, right? The teachers union have been really at the lead of building solidarity, community solidarity, and doing unionism right? Right now, you have an opportunity because right in this area, the frontier workers, the people that work for Frontier Communications are in a big contract dispute. In fact, if I remember correctly, this weekend, I think, their contract expires. And so people with the DSA like myself have been going out to their informational pickets and supporting them and adding our voice to their struggle. So if people are interested in that, I can give you more information about that. And support the PRO Act. So there's this big thing in Congress right now. It's kind of languishing, but it would be a change to labor law. Labor law in this country is very weak. The law basically more often than not is on the side of corporations right now, on the side of workers. The PRO Act would really make a big step in the right direction in terms of changing labor law in this country and making it more pro-worker. Unfortunately, it's like priority 5 right now, the Biden administration, right? And it's one of those things where it'll never get through the Senate, with the current setup of the Senate and the filibuster. So we don't know what the future of it is, but it's so important if the labor movement's really gonna rebuild itself and gain a ground that it's lost so much over the last few decades. So ultimately, it's all about organizing, right? That's what it's about, working people taking their collective power and using it to change their society, to change their own lives. That's why I think, despite maybe the flaws that unions have had over the years, and there have been many, right, that they are so essential and so important to building a just society. One last thing I'll leave you with before I leave. I'm doing a talk on the 9th of September as part of the DSA, the Inland Empire branch of the DSA. If you go to the DSA calendar, it's really easy to find. If you just go to Google and type IEDSA calendar, it'll pop up right away. It's the first thing that'll pop up. And if you go to the calendar, you see that blue highlighted one there. That's where you can register. It's a Zoom talk, so you can click on that and then register for the Zoom talk. So if you're interested in attending that, I'd love to have you. Some of it will be similar to what I presented here. Some of it will be a little different. So I'd love to have you if you're available for that. So thank you so much for inviting me. I'm going to stick around if anybody has questions later on as well. Can you release it from here? Or okay.
Bill, we'll take questions after. So I'll let you know for the end. Thank you. Thank you. Stick to the thing. Okay, our closing hymn is the Fire of Commitment. Those in the sanctuary, sit back, close your eyes, and listen quietly. Thank you.
From the light of days remembered, burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion lead to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin.
The world aches for us to join together and bring about healing, toil for justice, and produce ever increasing love. This is our calling. Go forth and act accordingly. Namaste, amen, and blessed be. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing your valuable time and insights with us this morning. It is sincerely appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you again. We are going to have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the service. So we ask that you be aware this will be included on the video that is posted.
I remind you that if the mic really is giving you fits, another way to handle it is to go on up to the lectern and state your question from there, if this thing isn't working.
Okay. Well, I'm waiting for the first person to come up. I'll just point out something I meant to say earlier. I don't know if people saw the picture that was of me that was up earlier. Do I need a new picture? You think it's about 15 years old, that picture? I need a new headshot.
It was a good service. I agree with you. I think that the unions have declined radically. What do you think should be some steps going forward in terms of like, specifically for like younger people, because younger people don't really see the value of unions. I'm more seeing like a demographic, so.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a tough one. How do we, create more education about what unions should be, what they can be, how you can get involved in them. I am excited. I was a teacher as well. That's what I did for most of my adult career. For 15 years, I was a history teacher. And one thing I'll say is that I'm constantly impressed with younger generations and their understanding of so many of the world, right? I see a much greater consciousness among younger people than there were among my generation. I see so much less divisions, whether they're racially or by gender preference and things like that that I did certainly when I was growing up. So I have a lot of hope. Whether that's translating though into more interest in unions, and one of the reasons why I'm doing the talk that I'm doing on the 9th is even within my own organization, within the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, you would assume that everybody there would pretty much understand the importance of unions. Not necessarily, right? And so, that's one of the reasons we're doing the talk. The whole talk is entitled, why should socialists support unions? So it's an uphill battle. Certainly, again, one of the things really standing against people organizing these days too is the labor law in this country. So it's so essential. When Obama was in office, there was something called IFCA, the Employee Free Choice Act, that was proposed. It would have made changes to labor law then. Never happened. Just ended up dropping off the priority list. Now we have Biden in office. We have the PRO Act. I really hope the PRO Act doesn't go the way of IFCA, right? We really need these changes. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but.
I guess I'll use this. Frequently in civil rights, there have been issues where basically Black folks, brown folks, and women and men get set against each other. Geez, I can't liberate all of you, choose one. And then and if
Right, yeah, and in fact, I think I may have left it. I meant to put, when I was talking about the kind of challenges of the future, one of the ones that I wanted to mention too was polarization. We were obviously seeing that to a great degree right now. The interesting thing about union struggles is they can be tremendous sites of creating unity that are hard to create otherwise, right? I don't know if anybody's ever seen the film Mate One. Anybody ever seen the film Mate One? If you haven't, check it out sometime. It's about the miners' struggles back in the early 20th century, right? But in that film, you see white native-born workers, and you see Italian workers, and you see black workers, and they're all kind of a little bit at edge, and the company's trying to set them against each other, right? But it's really in that process of struggle that consciousness can overcome. And I've seen this happen myself. One of the big struggles I was involved in when I was very young, one of the first labor struggles I was involved in was a Staley company in Decatur, Illinois. The workers were locked out. The company wanted to cut their benefits and make all kinds of changes to their schedules and all that. And a lot of these workers were relatively conservative. They were from a small town in Illinois, mostly white workers. Some of them had ex-Vietnam vets and so on. And a lot of them had kind of a very conservative mindset. And there was a smaller subset of black workers too that didn't always necessarily, interchange with the white workers very much. All that changed in that struggle, right? They lost that struggle, unfortunately. But in that 3-year struggle, one of the organizers of that struggle went on to work specifically in racial justice movement after that struggle was over, right? He took that on as like a life commitment. So you can see these things happen when people are in struggle together, that is transformed, those consciousnesses are transformed. That's one thing I would say. The other thing I'd say too is that one of the great things I've really enjoyed seeing over the years is how much people of color are now at the forefront of the labor movement, right? Immigrant workers are the leaders of the most militant struggles in this country these days with the labor movement. So it's also a really a way of creating more empowerment for those people as well. So. Grace?
So the mic seems to be working. Pretty good.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, I had 2 questions. I know some young people who work for a corporation and they were fired for going to a union organizing meeting. Is there anything that you can do to counter that move?
I'm so glad you raised a situation like that, because that's a perfect example of how weak our labor law is, right? Technically, that's illegal. They cannot be fired for discussing, union or exploring that option. Or we're trying to organize a union. That is an illegal activity. Now, the problem with our labor law is, right, you can go and sue the company to get your job back, to get lost wages back, and all that stuff. That could take 3 years, right, before that ever happens. So that's one of the reasons why we need to change labor law so much. The more direct way to deal with a situation like that, and I don't know the specifics of this company or anything, but what I have seen over and over again, it worked much better. And the workers' centers, which is a very kind of alternative form of organizing that's close to unions, but it's a little different. One thing that they've been able to do oftentimes is use direct action, right? So a couple of workers get fired for trying to organize a union at one place. They get the community together. They start protesting that business, right? They do whatever they can to interfere with kind of the normal operation of that business, and the business will back down, right? That's a much more direct way and usually a better way of actually winning a situation like that. But they certainly have the ability to go to the courts. One of my friends in Chicago, was an organizer in Chicago, they were fighting for these car wash workers for had to be 7 years, and they finally now won their case, and they got all these back wages and everything. But most workers can't wait 7 years to get something resolved, right? That's a big problem.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And the second question I had was, you mentioned it should be militant Could you define?
Define militant, right, right. That sounds like a strong term, right? What I mean by that is that too often in recent decades, right, unions' relationship with the company has been kind of like, all right, we'll give you a little bit here, you give a little bit there, whatever. Mostly it's been we give back, right? Lots of concessions on part of the workers, right? They're struggling, so we'll pay more for our health care, or they're struggling, so we won't get a raise this contract, whatever. Lots of concessionary contract because they've been afraid to take like things like strike action and so on. Mainly because strikes have been defeated so often, which is part of the problem. But it's the unions that have really taken on the offensive. The teachers are a perfect example of this, right? That have really gone on the offensive, and they have made major gains because of it, right? One of the most exciting struggles that I was involved in in my history of labor activism was in Chicago. This group of workers, their plant was going to close on them like overnight practically. And they were basically going to be just totally screwed. They weren't going to get even what was legally owed them in terms of compensation and so on. The workers occupied the factory. They decided they went into a work shift one day, and they said, okay, we're not leaving until the company negotiates with about this. They not only won what was legally owed them in terms of their, the wages, but a new company came in and said, we'll restart this factory, and we're willing to work with these workers, right? So they actually were able to restart the factory and keep their jobs. Those kind of actions, which built the labor movement in the 30s, right, have been almost abandoned by the labor movement in recent years, right? So, and one thing I'd say too is we can learn a lot from people from unions abroad, right? A lot of unions internationally have been much more successful because they're willing to take on the boss more than they are here, right?
There.
It's in and out. Dang it. Totally out.
Oh, there we go. There we go. I'm going to stop right here. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
As a community organizer and activist, I'm almost always on an issue, on the side of labor. And if I ever find myself not on the side of labor, that makes me stop and rethink what I'm thinking. Except in one, almost constantly in one case, and that is with police unions. And I'd like to hear, I know you talked a lot about sort of what makes a union work and what makes a union not work. And I kind of like to hear a little about what your thoughts are about police unions and how they fit into the bigger labor movement.
Right. Here's what I'll say about that. I say there's two views on it, and I certainly fall into one of those two camps, and I think it's the camp that's gaining ground. One camp would say, well, police are workers too. My father was a Chicago policeman, right? So to some degree, I understand that perspective, right? That they're workers too, and they deserve to be represented and whatever. And that by being in the labor movement, maybe they'll be more understanding and friendly to other workers or other unions or whatever. That's one side, one perspective, right? The other perspective is to say, police play a very specific social function in our society that sets them apart from other working people, right? And so their unions have generally functioned in a different way, which is to defend their very brutal activities against other workers, particularly people of color, obviously, right? And so that side of the approach is actually would like to see the police union expelled from the AFL-CIO, right? Because they don't recognize that they really are part of the same labor movement. I would side more on that side, right? There's just, and even my father, who's really become very progressive in his later years, would agree that the police unions has spent the bulk of their time trying to defend cops that have done the wrong things, right? That have brutalized, people of color and so on. So it's a big controversy right now in the labor movement, but yeah, that's kind of where things are at, I'd say.
The prison unions. The prison unions are in favor of harsher punishments, 3 strikes, and that's crazy. I mean, they don't need it. We've got plenty of bad people getting locked up. The prisons don't need to defend their turf like that, but they do. It's just wrong.
Right, yeah. That's another one I'd say is very complicated situation because there's all kinds of cross interest there too. So one of the biggest problems with in the prison industrial complex in this country, right, has been the rise of privatization of prisons, right? And interestingly enough, on that front, like the prison unions have been kind of good, right? Because they fought the privatization. But yeah, there's certainly a problem. The problem that you have with prisons, right, is that they're almost always built in communities that have very little other job base, right? And so the prison becomes their primary industry ultimately, right? And that becomes a real problem. So yeah, I think the labor, that's when you talk about the labor movement as a whole taking a social justice union focus and a class-based focus, right? They've got to be, those people in prison are workers too, ultimately, right? And so they've got to be considered and their interests considered as well as we talk about the labor movement as a whole, right? In fact, one of the things that was outlawed in the 19th century, and it's coming back way too much, right, is prison labor. It was basically outlawed in the 19th century that you didn't want workers in prison competing with workers on the outside, right? Because obviously they're going to get very low wages in prison. In the latter 20th century, that's changed so much. That's why I used to see they only would do state functions, right? License plates and stuff like that. Now they're doing telecommunications work and all kinds of other things, right? So that's highly problematic as well.
Okay, I do one myself. Again, or else there'll be nothing for anyone.
Yeah, better. Yeah.
Hi there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Okay, you mentioned the environmental issues that we have. We have more people in the world, more people trying to live well for themselves and their family. And we have limits on the land, how much damage has been done. Have they done any studies that say how much of a hit the average laborer would be willing to take if he could guarantee that he doesn't have poisonous slops hitting the water table where his kids drink? Because we've got issues like that. We have trekking alleys that that go through poor neighborhoods because they can't stop them, and the kids there are taking like 1,000 times more, 1,000 percentage times more cancer. How do we combine our need for labor and our need to not poison ourselves?
That's a really excellent question. I was actually, one of my other jobs when I wasn't teaching was I worked as a environmental justice organizer in a Mexican American community in Chicago that was very impacted by pollution sources. In fact, that was one of the big challenges we had. So it was 2 coal-fired power plants. One in my neighborhood in Pilsen and one in another adjacent neighborhood called La Villita, which was also a Mexican immigrant working class neighborhood. And it was a 10-year struggle that we were involved in. We won it eventually, which that they're both gone now. But one of the challenges that we faced is that we really tried to make a relationship with the unionized workers that were in those plants, right? Because what we weren't interested in is with them getting, their jobs gone and then having nothing, no transition whatsoever, right? Unfortunately, that's an example of unions being very short-sighted. They never developed, as much as we tried to open up a dialogue with them, they never reciprocated. So in the end, they lost out because those places closed and those workers did lose their jobs, or some of them got shifted to other facilities, but distantly from where they were working at originally. So it was a real short-sighted move on their part. I'm very excited to be part of this effort of the Green New Deal, which brings together the interests of both ecological change that we need in our society, transformation we need in society for ecological sustainability, which also can be a place for job creation, for living wage job creation, and so on. I think those two can come together. It's a challenge, and I think one of the things that you're touching on, and this I kind of maybe not change hats, but a little bit different focus here. As a socialist, as somebody that believes that our big problem is capitalism, right? There is an inherent problem with their system, right? Which is it is based on continual expansion of production, right? And that's ecologically unsustainable ultimately. So we do have to transform our society so that it's in balance, or there's no escaping the crisis. I think the labor movement can be a vehicle in that struggle. But it does require some change of consciousness. Some unions have been better about this than others. The steel workers were very good about, they joined the Blue-Green Alliance, which is an attempt to kind of bring those interests together. But it's still a work in progress that obviously that needs to work out. But the interests shouldn't be irreconcilable, because ultimately the people that are harmed most by the crisis, right, are working people in this nation and globally. So their interests are very much in getting a handle on this. So.
Thanks again, Jerry. So there's lunch waiting outside in the parish hall. So if everyone wants to head that way, we're moving. Okay, thank you. Thank you.